folks. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the blues standard Stormy Monday, and we're going to be comparing 3 different versions of it by T-Bone Walker, Bobby Blue Bland, and the Allman Brothers Band. We're going to begin with the guy who wrote the song in the first place, Aaron T-Bone Walker, known as T-Bone. T-Bone Walker recorded the song in 1947. It was his biggest hit, and it was massively influential on subsequent blues artists. T-Bone Walker was pretty far ahead of his time in a number of ways. For example, he played the guitar behind his head and with his teeth long before Jimi Hendrix. He was doing splits on stage long before James Brown. He was playing double stop guitar leads, Chuck Berry style, long before Chuck Berry. Yeah, he's an interesting character.
They call it Stormy Monday, but Tuesday's just as bad. Yes, they call it Stormy Monday, but Tuesday's just as bad. Wednesday's worse, and Thursday's also sad. Yes, the eagle flies on Friday.
His original title for the song was Call It Stormy Monday, but Tuesday is Just as Bad. And that is a long and unwieldy title, and it caused him some problems because everybody who recorded it subsequently shortened it to Call It Stormy Monday or Stormy Monday or Stormy Monday Blues. And that made it a little bit complicated for him to get royalties from all these cover versions. To make matters worse, there is an unrelated song called Stormy Monday Blues by Earl Hines and Billy Eckstine that had been an R&B hit a few years before T-Bone Walker's song came out. Secondhand Songs lists 227 cover versions, and that doesn't begin to account for, live performances and jam sessions. The tune is a real jam session standard. Stormy Monday is a 12-bar blues. It's got a pretty standard form. The chord changes are a little bit non-standard. First, there's this intro that goes E flat 7, D7, E flat 7, D7. And this is a bit mysterious if you don't know what is coming next. Like, what is the relationship between these two chords? Like, what key are we in? Maybe E flat 7 is the substitute dominant in the key of D, or maybe D is the dominant in the key of G, and then E flat 7 is like a secondary substitute dominant. We don't really know until that first verse starts. And then it turns out, yes, we've been in G this entire time. So those intro chords are the flat 6 and 5, or the sub 5 of 5 and the 5, however you want to think about them. So the main part of the song goes G7,
They call it Stormy Monday,
C7,
but Tuesday's just as bad.
G7,
Yes,
C7.
They call it Stormy Monday, but Tuesday's just as bad.
G7, B flat 7, A minor 7,
Wednesday's worse, and
D7,
Thursday's also sad.
G7, C7, G7, D7.
Yes, the
repeats.
eagle flies on Friday.
So this is mostly standard 12-bar blues in G, but with a couple of small twists. In measures 9 and 10, where like a standard Delta or Chicago blues tune would go 5 to 4, D7 to C7, T-Bone Walker is using a more jazz version of the 12-bar blues where he's going 2-5, so he's going A minor 7 to D7. And that doesn't really affect the way he plays on top of it, but it does give a sort of jazzier vibe. The other interesting twist is the B flat 7 at the end of measure 8. You could think of that as the substitute dominant chord in the key of A minor. That B flat 7 is kind of coming out of left field harmonically. It's got an A flat in it. That's a pretty weird note, but then it resolves to A minor 7. Makes more sense. So let's talk about T-Bone Walker's guitar solo.
I say.
It's rhythmically very complicated. The pitches are less complicated, so I'll start by talking about those. T-Bone Walker is using this pitch collection that includes the notes G, A, B flat, B, C, C sharp, D, E, and F. And there is no name for this pitch collection. It's not like an official scale or anything. You could think of it as a combination of the G blues scale and the G major blues scale. So the G blues scale, quote unquote, is G, B flat, C, C sharp, D, F. And the G major blues scale is G, A, B flat, B, D, E. And I say blues scale, quote unquote, because the blues scale is not a real thing. This scale that people commonly call the blues scale was first put down in print by Jaimoe in his book How to Play Jazz and Improvise in 1967. And he didn't mean that it was literally a scale. He meant, these are the most characteristic non-diatonic, non-major scale notes that are used in the blues. Unfortunately, this pedagogical shorthand that he intended was taken at face value by generations and generations of musicians who think, to play the blues, I just take the notes in this scale and combine them the way I would combine the notes in the major scale to make a melody. And no, you cannot do that. It doesn't work. It's not a bad sounding pitch collection, but it is neither necessary nor sufficient to actually play the blues. And so the same thing applies to the, quote, major blues scale, unquote. It's this attempt to recognize, the Abersold blues scale doesn't really describe actual practice. There is also this more kind of major flavored blues, and maybe this is a convenient shorthand for it. I mean, learn it, I guess, but yeah, I think it's better to just listen to the actual music. The problem with thinking of the blues in terms of any scale system is that it doesn't get at the fact that many of the important notes are not within the Western tuning system at all. Like they're not found on the piano keys or the guitar frets. So these are called the blue notes. And T-Bone Walker is constantly bending his strings to make his notes go sharp to reach these notes that are in between the piano keys. So it's not really true that he's using the notes A, B flat, and B. It's more like he's bending his A's sharp towards B flat or past B flat. He's also bending his C's up towards C sharp or past C sharp. So it's more like he's using these pitch zones in between A and B and in between C and D. And yeah, you could abstract those pitch zones down into these strings of chromatic pitches, but that doesn't accurately describe what he's doing. How about the rhythms? Yeah, that's like the real complexity and interest of T-Bone Walker's playing. The tempo he's playing at is really slow, only 66 beats per minute. And when you play that slow, that gives you a lot of opportunities to subdivide your beat in different ways. All right, so here is a measure of 4/4 time in quarter notes. Here it is in eighth notes, dividing the quarter notes in half. Here are eighth note triplets. We're dividing each quarter note into thirds. Here's 16th notes, where we're dividing each of the eighth notes in half. And here are 16th note triplets, where we're dividing up the eighth notes into thirds. T-Bone Walker is using all of these subdivision values. Not only that, but he's also rushing and dragging at times for expressive purposes. Also, he is using a lot of eighth note swing and sometimes some 16th note swing. That adds up to a real complex rhythmic vocabulary that he has. And if you listen to just the first 5 notes of his solo, these 5 notes are 7 1/4 16th notes worth of musical time. And I guess you could describe them as 2 32nd notes and a 16th note triplet, but that's not exactly right. That's just as close as you can come. And in general, if you're going to try to represent the solo in music notation quantized into some sort of metrical grid, you're going to have to simplify it. Now you might ask, well, why bother trying to represent it on the metrical grid? Why not just learn it by ear? And yeah, that is the way that you should be learning it and you should be studying it. But I do think it's worth trying to represent these things in notation. First of all, to show how limited notation is for rhythm, but also just to recognize the sheer complexity of T-Bone Walker's rhythmic approach. Now, I don't necessarily think that complexity and musical quality are the same thing. Some of the best ideas are the simplest ones. And the blues seems very simple, right? It's got this repetitive, formulaic structure and these particular melodic tropes that people use. Then you get in there at the micro level, at the level of detail, and the music is extraordinarily complex and interesting and is not really that well studied in formal musicology circles, and that is something that I hope will change in the coming years. T-Bone Walker grew up with Charlie Christian, the great jazz guitar innovator Charlie Christian. They grew up together in Texas. They took guitar lessons together with the same teacher, Ralph Bigfoot Chuck Hamilton. And they played some shows as a duo where they would alternate on bass and guitar. There's no recordings of that, but I bet it was awesome. T-Bone Walker is supposedly a blues guitarist, and Charlie Christian is supposedly a jazz guitarist, but in the first half of the 20th century, there wasn't nearly as much distance between those genres as there would later be. Charlie Christian unfortunately died very, very young in the early 1940s and didn't get to see the massive influence and impact his playing would have. But certainly T-Bone Walker was heavily impacted by it. You can hear him quoting a real Charlie Christianism in his tune Mean Old World. What you're hearing is called false fingering, and it's an idea that Charlie Christian probably learned from saxophone players. The idea is that in this T-Bone Walker tune, he's playing the note D alternately on the 3rd fret of the B string and the 7th fret of the G string. And those produce the same note, but the intonation of them is a little bit different, the tuning is slightly different, and the timbre of them is a little bit different. And that gives you this nice kind of contrast. And it's something that saxophone and trumpet players do too. Here are a couple examples of Charlie Christian using that riff. First, here's Airmail Special. And here's Solo Flight. The next recording we're going to check out is by Bobby Blue Bland, and he recorded this in 1961.
They call it Stormy Monday, but Tuesday's just as bad. They call it Stormy Monday, but Tuesday's just as bad. Wednesday's worse, Lord, and Thursday's also sad. The eagle flies on Friday.
The guitar on this recording is played by a guy named Wayne Bennett. And he had a long and colorful career playing with a lot of different people. And he's most famous for being a blues guitarist, but he also played jazz, R&B, funk, rock and roll, all kinds of things. So he played with Fats Domino, Cannonball Adderley, Bohannon, and some of these albums that he's appeared on have even been sampled in some rap songs. I mean, it's a really broad and diverse career that he's had. He is probably the one who did the reharmonizing of the chords, I assume. He is playing these chords a little bit differently than T-Bone Walker. Bobby Bland does the song in a different key than T-Bone Walker does. T-Bone Walker is doing it in G. Bobby Bland is doing it a half step up in A flat. But to make it easier to compare the two of them, I brought Bobby Bland's version down a half step. So if the timbres are a little weird, that's why. Imagining for a second that Bobby Bland's recording is also in G. His intro chords go G7, A flat 7, G7, D augmented. Now it's a similar idea to T-Bone Walker's intro, but T-Bone Walker started on 5, flat 6, 5, and the Bobby Bland recording is going 1, flat 2, 1. And then it ends on this 5 chord, this augmented 5 chord. Ooh, that's a pretty colorful sound, yeah? So that augmented chord is just a stack of major thirds. D to F sharp is a major third, F sharp to A sharp is a major third, and then A sharp to D is a major third. It's a symmetrical chord. And blues musicians love augmented chords on the fifth because the augmented fifth of the 5 chord is the sharp second in the overall key, which is enharmonic with the flat third, which is one of the characteristic color tones in the blues. The Bobby Bland version has a lot more chord changes than T-Bone Walker's original does. So it goes G7, D flat 7, C7, C sharp diminished, G7, A flat 7, G7, D flat 7, C7.
They call it Stormy Monday.
C sharp diminished, G6, A minor 7, B minor 7, B flat minor 7, A minor 7,
When's this words?
E flat 7, D7, G7, G7 over B, C7, C sharp diminished, G6, C7, G7, D7, back to G. We've got all these substitute dominant chords. We've got A flat 7, which is the substitute dominant in G. We've got D flat 7, the substitute dominant in C. And we've got E flat 7, the substitute dominant in D. So the 1, the 4, and the 5 chords have these substitute dominants in front of them. Very, very jazzy and hip. We've also got this string of minor 7th chords in measures 7 and 8. G to A minor to B minor, that's just walking up the G major harmonized scale, 1, 2, 3. And it's very kind of nursery rhymey. I mean, it's something that would sound good in a Simon and Garfunkel song. But then to get from B minor 7 back down to A minor 7, they put B flat minor 7 in between. The ergonomic logic of that on the guitar is really obvious. You just slide your minor 7th shape from the 7th fret to the 6th fret to the 5th fret. But like in terms of functional harmony, that B flat minor 7 makes no sense. There's room for all of this extra harmony because Bobby Bland takes the song even slower than T-Bone Walker does, around like 60 beats per minute, and that is slow. As befits his jazz background, Wayne Bennett plays a little bit more complex than T-Bone Walker does. First of all, he uses a larger collection of pitches. He actually uses every chromatic pitch except for A flat and F sharp. And he's also bending, right, in these blues pitch zones between 2 and 3, between 4 and 5, and doing a lot of sliding around. And his rhythms are also very complex. Like he has that kind of scribbly 16th note triplet feel. But is also playing more 32nd notes. That's where you divide the 16th notes in half. And it's very difficult to quantize some of this playing down to the metrical grid because it's not even so much that Wayne Bennett is playing these different subdivisions. There's one spot where he's just playing the same rhythm over and over, but he's speeding it up and slowing it down. That is a difficult thing to notate. It's really, really hip. And you have to have a confident and solid rhythm section behind you if you're going to speed up and slow down on purpose and not throw them all off, yeah. Wayne Bennett's solo also includes that Charlie Christian false fingering lick, the same one that T-Bone Walker used on Mean Old World. It's not surprising that a jazz player like Wayne Bennett would be hip to Charlie Christian. But yeah, it really shows you just how broad and deep Charlie Christian's reach was as an influence. And certainly if he had lived longer, he probably would have had a similar career to Wayne Bennett, where he probably would have been very comfortable hopping around between, rock, R&B, jazz, blues, and funk, and who knows what else he would have gotten up to. The reason that I wanted to do a podcast episode about this song in the first place is because it was recorded by the Allman Brothers on their album At Fillmore East from 1971.
While we're doing that blues thing, we're going to play this old Bobby Bland song for you. Actually, it's a T-Bone Walker song.
At Fillmore East is like a real jam band classic. If you're any kind of hippie, then you're probably familiar with it. It didn't get a ton of radio play because the songs on it are so long, but for sure it was a big hit on the album charts, and it's still pretty widely known.
They call it Stormy Monday, but Tuesday's just as bad. They call it Stormy Monday, but Tuesday's just as bad. Lord, and Wednesday's worse. Thursday's also sad.
I grew up on this album, and I heard Duane Allman introduce it by naming T-Bone Walker and Bobby Bland, but back when I was growing up, there was no internet, so it was much harder to track down these old blues records. So I didn't get to hear the T-Bone Walker or Bobby Bland recordings until much, much, much later. The Allman's version is based very heavily on the Bobby Blue Bland version, but they play it even slower. They play it like 58 beats per minute. I mean, that is unbelievably slow. It is really hard to hold it together at that slow a tempo. They use a somewhat simplified version of Bobby Bland's changes, although they introduce a few new twists of their own. Their version uses the same intro to T-Bone Walker's intro: D7, E flat 7, D7, D augmented. And then the chords go G13, C13, G13, A flat 7, G7, D flat 7, C13, G, A minor 7, B minor 7, A flat minor 7, A minor 7, C minor 7, G7, C7, G7, D augmented. They're doing that minor 7th walk up and down like Bobby Bland. The main difference is in measure 10, where instead of playing E flat 7 and D7, they play C minor 7. That is a nice chord. It's modal interchange borrowed from parallel G minor. It's the minor 4 chord. And also C minor 7 is a minor third higher than A minor 7. So it's kind of like minor squared. Oh, it's such a beautiful chord. And especially the way they walk up to it by going A flat minor 7 to A minor 7 and then up to C minor 7. Ooh, beautiful stuff. And it's also cool how they use these 13th chords for G7 and C7, and they imply them with just these pairs of sixths. So on the G13, they just play the root G and the 13th E, and then the flat 7th F and the 5th D. And then for C7, they do that same thing, but just up a fourth. That's not a complicated idea, but it's such an elegant one. So we're going to talk about this guitar solo by Duane Allman. Duane Allman is best known for his slide guitar playing, and I had always assumed that he was playing slide on this song, but no, he's actually playing this song normally. He does play a lot of slide on this album, so for example, in the album opener, Statesboro Blues, that's slide guitar. But the reason that I thought he was playing slide on Stormy Monday is he does all these string bends, some of which are very deep. So, the whole point of slide guitar is that you're not limited to the piano key pitches, like you can just use the entire pitch continuum. But you can also get that same effect by just bending your notes sharp, as all blues guitarists do, but Duane Allman is particularly good at it. Duane's playing is rhythmically simpler than Wayne Bennett's. He's using similar vocabulary, but no 32nd notes. He doesn't get any finer than 16th note triplets, and he's much more on the grid. Rhythmically, pitch-wise, he's not really on the grid at all. But yeah, his rhythms are a little bit more straightforward, maybe reflecting the fact that he's playing in a rock band rather than a jazzy blues band. His pitch collection is a little bit different also. He's not using as many different notes as Wayne Bennett. He's playing G, A, B flat, B, C, D, E, and F. And then at the very, very end of the solo, he plays F sharp a couple of times. But so ignoring the F sharp, you could think of Duane's pitch collection as the union of G Mixolydian mode and G Dorian mode. But again, thinking of it in terms of these European modes is not really accurate because Duane is really playing the pitch zone in between A and B, the pitch zone between E and F. He doesn't really get into that zone in between C and D as much on this song. Listen to the very first note in the solo. That's a bend from A up to B flat and then past it, but not quite all the way up to B. And he gives a little bit of pitch coloration to every note that he plays. It isn't just his playing that makes Duane Allman sound so different from T-Bone Walker or Wayne Bennett. It's also because of his gear. Both T-Bone Walker and Wayne Bennett are playing these hollow body guitars, these jazz-style guitars, and they're not using any effects, and their amps are not cranked up very loud. I mean, T-Bone Walker gets like a little bit of distortion, but it's pretty close to clean tone, and Wayne Bennett plays very clean tone like a jazz musician. Dwayne doesn't really use any effects either, like he's not using any pedals, but he does have his amp cranked all the way up, incredibly loud, so it's overdriving. You get this kind of singing distortion. So every note that he plays just sustains forever because it's so distorted, which is the same thing as extreme compression. Normally when you pluck the guitar string, it's very loud for the first, millisecond, and then it very quickly tapers off in volume. But Dwayne's notes just stay loud the entire time. Whether he picks the note or just hammers it on or pulls it off, it's just as loud. He does end up picking most of his notes anyway, just for this kind of precision of the notes onset, but he really wouldn't have to. He could just kind of finger tap the entire solo and it would be just as loud. Now, it's possible that this was not a deliberate aesthetic choice. It's possible that he just had to have his amp up this loud just to be heard at all, because the Allman Brothers Band also includes another electric guitar, an electric bass, a Hammond organ, 2 drum kits, plus sometimes, harmonica or saxophone, blah, 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 blah. Or, maybe Dwayne just really liked that distorted sound of an amp cranked all the way up, and it just happened to fit in well in the rock idiom that he was playing in. I don't really know. My students tend to take a dim view of white covers of blues songs and white covers of black music generally, but they tend to want to give Duane Allman a pass. Like, their attitude tends to be, yeah, Duane Allman is cool, and the Allman Brothers in general are cool. And so it's worth asking, why are the Allman Brothers so good at playing the blues when so few other white people are? And I'm going to get back to that question in a second, but I first want to tell a little bit more of Duane Allman's story, especially because it ends so sadly. At Fillmore East was recorded on March 12th and 13th, 1971. It was released on July 6th, 1971. It was by far the Allman Brothers' biggest hit so far. It was their first album to get anywhere near the charts. And while it was climbing up the charts, Duane Allman got into a motorcycle accident on October 29th, 1971, and died the next day in the hospital. He was only 24 years old. And I mean, that is an incalculable loss, right? Like, the guy was such a virtuoso musician. He's best known for his blues playing, but he played in a variety of other styles in the Allman Brothers as well. So for example, their song Blue Sky, recorded very shortly before his death, he's basically playing country and sounds perfectly plausible. And beyond the Allman Brothers, Duane was also an in-demand session player. His most famous recording as a session player is on Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs by Derek and the Dominoes. But I don't like Eric Clapton, so I'm not going to talk about it. What I will talk about is Wilson Pickett's recording of Hey Jude, which includes some of Duane's most intense guitar licks.
To make it better.
And apparently it was Duane Allman's suggestion that Wilson Pickett do that song in the first place. And it was a good suggestion because it was a huge hit. That's also Duane Allman playing slide on Aretha Franklin's recording of The Weight.
I pulled into Nazareth. I was feeling about a half past dead. I just need some place where I can lay my head. Hey, mister, can you tell me where a girl might find a bed? Just grinned and shook my hand.
I think one reason why the Allman Brothers are such a plausible white blues band and why Duane Allman is such a plausible white blues musician is he just so clearly did his homework, right? It really matters that he name checks both T-Bone Walker and Bobby Blue Bland from the stage. He has so clearly, deeply internalized both of those recordings. And he's not exactly imitating them. He sounds like himself, but he definitely knows the vocabulary, right? And he is so clearly paying attention to people like Wilson Pickett and Aretha Franklin. Something that I like about his sound is how vocalistic it is. When he plays guitar, he sounds like he's singing. The phrases have a beginning and an end, and he takes breaths in between them. I would bet you anything that he was humming or just kind of sub-vocalizing these solos as he was playing them. There's such a clear vocalistic quality to his playing that to me makes him sound a lot better than if he was just shredding and throwing notes around. I love Led Zeppelin, but Jimmy Page doesn't necessarily always sound like he's singing. Sometimes he's just shredding. And shredding can be very exciting, but it doesn't have the same feeling to it, at least not for me, that Duane Allman's style of playing has. And it also really helps that the Allman Brothers don't rush. Normally, when white people play blues, they play it too fast, usually way too fast. Same thing goes for when white people play R&B or funk or soul. They almost always rush. Not only do the Allman Brothers not rush, they actually play slower than T-Bone Walker, much slower, and even slower than Bobby Bland. And that's a challenging thing to do. You would think that playing slower would be easier, and at the beginner level, that's true. If you're not able to play fast, it seems very difficult. But once you sort of get to that technical level where you're able to play fast, playing fast can actually hide a lot of sloppiness. It can conceal a lot of weak musicianship. When you're playing slow, especially extremely slow, you're very exposed. All your micro timing is very audible, right? People can really tell, are you in the pocket or are you not? Your choices matter a lot. The subtleties of your phrasing. Are you slightly ahead? Are you slightly behind? There are all the different subdivisions that are available to you at these slow tempos. Fast playing can be impressive, but for me at least, if I want to hear music that has depth of feeling, it's almost always going to be slower. And so I appreciate that the Allman Brothers can stay locked into the groove when they're playing this slowly. So Duane Allman's playing is very well documented. There are lots of tutorials online studying his solos note for note, recreating his tone with various vintage and modern gear. That's great. There is not nearly so much scholarship on T-Bone Walker or Wayne Bennett. If you go on YouTube, you'll see some tutorial videos about Stormy Monday, but it's mostly just how to play the chords. Occasionally, people will talk about little isolated riffs, but nobody is breaking down entire solos. The situation is starting to change. So, for example, Charlie Christian is starting to get more serious scholarly attention. But Charlie Christian is a jazz musician, and jazz has become academically legitimate in a way that blues and R&B kind of haven't. On the one hand, you have these amateurs studying the Allman Brothers very intensively, and now you're starting to have these academics and professional musicologists looking at Charlie Christian. But for a player like Wayne Bennett, you're kind of on your own because his playing is too complicated for the amateurs to get into, and the academics aren't really looking at it. Now, I don't think that the blues or R&B need academic validation. They've been doing fine this whole time. But I do think it should be expected baseline cultural knowledge for people in music school. Because right now in music school, you have to know a tremendous lot about the Western European historical canon. You have to be able to harmonize four-voice chorales like Bach, and you have to know what augmented sixth chords are, but you don't have to really understand the blues. It's starting to be available as a thing you can study in electives, but it's hardly ever required, and certainly not in any kind of depth. And I do think that's a problem because you get all of these formally trained musicians who don't really understand this music and don't necessarily value it. And I think they should value it because I think it's the most beautiful music that exists in the world, or certainly the most beautiful music that our culture has produced. And I consider myself lucky that my love of the blues survived intact through my formal music education, but I also think it really shouldn't have had to. And I'm very grateful to be in a position at New York University where we are encouraged to treat the blues as a core topic for music theory and oral skills and classes like that. But it's very early days for this to become more common. Right now, NYU is a real outlier, and I'm looking forward to the day when this just becomes the general practice in American music education. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Lord have mercy. Lord, have mercy on me. Lord, have mercy. My heart's and Miss